All right, let's get into it. Today, we're digging into the story of archaeology itself. We have this image of archaeologists as these rugged adventurers, but how did this field actually go from being basically a treasure hunt into the serious science that it is today? A science that literally deciphers the story of humanity? Okay, let's find out.
You might find this hard to believe, but some of the very first digs were, well, they were basically shopping sprees for the super rich. When they started digging at Pompeii back in the 1700s, the goal wasn't knowledge. Nope, it was a total free-for-all to yank beautiful statues and fancy marble out of the ground to decorate the homes of European nobles. No records, no notes, just artifacts completely ripped from their context. It was looting, plain and simple, not learning.
So the big question is, how did we go from that chaotic scramble for loot, to the careful, methodical science that we know today? That's the story we're going to piece together here. The whole journey from just collecting stuff to actually connecting the dots of our shared past.
And that brings us to our first major turning point, the first system builders. The real shift didn't happen by finding bigger treasures. It happened when a few key people stopped just collecting the past and started trying to connect it to the world it came from.
Now here's what's so cool. The real pioneers weren't really digging at all. They were this group called the chorographer-antiquarians. I'm talking about people like William Camden and William Stukeley. They were the first ones to really systematically map and record ancient ruins right there in the landscape. And as Professor Darrell Roll points out, and he's so right about this, these guys are the true, unsung heroes who laid the foundation for the entire discipline.
What they were doing was reviving an ancient practice called chorography. So instead of just grabbing some cool-looking artifact, they would describe a whole region. They'd map out how ancient ruins and objects actually fit into the landscape. This was, for all intents and purposes, the birth of the archaeological survey, the radical idea that where you find something is just as important as the thing itself.
And here is where it all comes together. In the late 1600s, one of these pioneers, Sir Robert Sibbald, was the very first person we know of to use the word archaeology in the way we do now. And look at his definition. The study of the past by looking at material evidence. He literally gave a name to what they were doing. He put a pin in it and said, this is a real field of study.
And this new way of thinking even crossed the Atlantic. Way back in 1784, Thomas Jefferson, long before he was president, decided to investigate a Native American burial mound on his land. But here's the key. Instead of just digging for stuff, he carefully cut a trench, and he observed the different layers in the soil, what we now call stratigraphy. And from that evidence, he figured out that the mound had been used for burials over a very long time. He was using evidence to answer a question. This is widely considered the first truly scientific excavation. So the practice was starting to take shape, which is great. But for archaeology to really truly become a science, it needed a completely new set of tools. Not digging tools, but intellectual tools. It needed a whole new way to think about time, about humanity, and about the past itself. In the 19th century, three revolutionary ideas came along and completely changed the game. First, you have deep time. Geologists proved the Earth wasn't just a few thousand years old. It was incredibly ancient. This gave human history a vast timeline to exist in. Second, evolution. Darwin's work showed that humans weren't just created as we are. We changed over time. That blew the doors wide open for searching for our origins. And finally, the three-age system. This was a simple but brilliant idea to organize artifacts into a Stone Age, Bronze Age, and Iron Age, proving the past had an order you could actually discover. Suddenly, you had the when and the why to ask real questions.
Okay, so now with this powerful new way of thinking in place, the focus could finally shift to perfecting the how. It was time to turn digging from a kind of destructive act into a disciplined science of careful recovery and recording.
And this led to a massive change in philosophy. The goal was no longer to just find pretty things, it was to record all the information. The method wasn't just digging anymore, it was meticulously documenting every single layer. And maybe most important, the focus shifted from the spectacular gold crown to the mundane piece of trash, because archaeologists realized that a broken pot can tell you just as much, sometimes more, about daily life. This new discipline was really forged in the field by pioneers like Sir Mortimer Wheeler and Kathleen Kenyon. Wheeler, who was actually a former military guy, brought this incredible military precision to his sites. They developed techniques like the grid square method, which lets you carefully record the exact 3D location of every single find.
excavation finally became a process of careful deconstruction, not just demolition.
Now we have to pause here because this is really important. The history of archaeology, like so many histories, is almost always told as a story of great men. But that's just not the whole picture. Not even close. From the very beginning, women have been absolutely essential pioneers, making groundbreaking discoveries and shaping the entire discipline, often against some incredible odds.
And we're talking about absolute giants in the field here. People like Dorothy Garrod, the first woman professor at Cambridge, whose work was fundamental. Gertrude Caton Thompson, who used her meticulous skills to prove that the incredible site of Great Zimbabwe was of African origin, directly fighting racist theories of her time. Harriet Boyd Hawes, who found the first Minoan town site. And of course, Kathleen Kenyon, whose methods we were just talking about. And we have to give a huge shout out to the Trowel Blazers Project. They do amazing work celebrating these women and so many others who have shaped this field.
So archaeology had finally become a science. But the story doesn't just stop there. In the 20th century, the field started to turn that critical eye on itself, questioning its own methods, its own assumptions, and the very nature of the stories it was telling about the past.
The second half of the 20th century was just a whirlwind of new ideas. First, the invention of radiocarbon dating was a total game changer. It gave archaeology a universal clock, but that new tool just kicked off a bigger debate. Should archaeology be a pure science, looking for universal laws of human behavior? That was the argument of the new archaeology. Or is it also a humanistic discipline that has to acknowledge our own biases and focus on interpretation and individual experience? That conversation, that constant questioning, is what makes the field so exciting today.
So yeah, we've come a long, long way from digging up statues for some rich duke's garden. We've gone from just collecting curiosities to developing a science that can reconstruct ancient diets, and from there to questioning the very nature of truth itself. The story of archaeology is really the story of learning how to ask better and better questions, which of course makes you wonder, what will it uncover next about our past and ultimately about us?